In the second problem, there is a company called Newton Limited, and on 1st of Jan 2015, it issued a prospectus inviting applications for 20,000 equity shares of rupees 10 each. Okay. Now, this is a company trying to issue some shares to the public, and it wants to issue 20,000 equity shares. Okay. So, issued shares, I told you all, I gave you all the distinction between authorized, issued and then subscribed shares. So, we are not interested here in how much the company is authorized to raise over its lifetime. We don't want to know that. But as of now, during this issue, it wants to sell 20,000 equity shares to the public. So, you need to highlight certain important information as you come across. Then, the whole issue they are saying was fully underwritten by three people, three underwriters, A, B and C as follows. A 10,000 shares, B 6,000 shares and C 4,000 shares. So, one thing to remember, fully underwritten, which means this entire 20,000, the risk for this entire 20,000 has been taken by these three underwriters. Okay. So, how much has each one agreed to take? Yes, 10,000. A says, okay, out of 20, I will take 10, meaning I take the risk or the responsibility for 10,000 shares. B says, I will take for 6,000 shares. And C says, I will take the risk of 4,000 shares. So, initial liability, what they initially intend to, take the responsibility for in case nobody subscribes for it is these many shares. Alright. Now, next we need to, from this, we need to figure out what is the gross liability ratio. Now, if you see earlier problem, the first problem, we were given percentages and we could easily reduce these percentages to ratios. So, we knew 4:3 is your gross liability ratio. Now, same way, from these amounts that are given, you have to reduce them down to ratios and see how much is the gross liability ratio of all these three underwriters. Alright. So, 4:3 is what we had in the last problem. Now, in this case, you have 10,000, 6,000 and 4,000. Right? This is your solution to working notes. Gross liability ratio, first working note. This is very simple to reduce down. You just have to find what is the common divider, right? The common divider for all of these figures. So, 10,000, 6,000 and you have third person with 4,000 shares. Okay. So, if you find a common number which can divide all of these, let's say for example 2, fine. So, leave out the zeros and you have 10:6:4, which can be further reduced. If you divide these by 2, 2 5s are 10, 2 3s are 6 and 2 2s are 4. So, the final ratio or gross liability ratio by reducing all these three numbers down to their lowest is 5:3:2. Is this clear to you all? Okay, so this is how whenever you are given whole numbers, like you're given the entire amount instead of percentages, you need to reduce it down to a particular ratio. Okay, so let's write here. Always better to note down and keep what is the gross liability ratio, because later on when we do calculations for 5:3:2, we do calculations for unmarked applications, it comes in very handy, like okay, this is the gross liability ratio in which you're supposed to divide the unmarked applications. Okay. Now, marked applications are also given in the problem. So, we have taken this information, our gross liability, and applications were received for 16,000 shares. Now you have to keep noticing and keep taking a mental note of all this information. You issued 20,000 shares, right? But received applications for 16,000 shares, which means somewhere your issue was undersubscribed. A few people did not apply for the shares of your company. Is that fine? So what you need to do is, we know now that there is an undersubscribed portion, okay, like an unsubscribed portion, and that will be taken finally by the underwriters. Okay. Now, out of the 16,000 shares, there were marked applications, which means A, B and C had sold some applications or shares to the public directly, by themselves, and their applications with their stamp had now been received, right? So let's deduct those first. Let's see how much we get. First one, A managed to sell 8,000, B has managed to sell 2,850, C has managed to sell 4,150. Is this clear? Okay, so each one marked applications, that is whatever they were asked to sell, they have managed to sell these many applications. Is this clear? Now, let's see what happens to the unmarked applications. Let's first get the total. Here, after deducting will be 2,000. Okay, then 6,000 minus 2,850 gives you 3,150. Now, this is an interesting part. In this case, in case of underwriter 3, 4,000 minus 4,150. What do you get? A negative 150. I was telling you all yesterday, whenever there is a negative amount, that means it is a surplus. Let's go back to our pro forma. There is something called a resultant liability or a surplus. A liability is when we get positive figures. Like for example, over here, we got all positive figures after minusing those many applications, right? So liability, that means underwriters are still supposed to pay. Then there is something called a surplus. When you get a negative figure, it's a surplus. Now, why surplus? See, this person or this underwriter C had agreed to sell 4,000. This was his liability, right? So, right in the beginning, during the time of the agreement, he said, I would be taking the responsibility for 4,000 shares. While selling the applications, he managed to sell 4,150. He sold a little extra than what he had promised. And there is no doubt about it. There is nothing wrong or there is no such restriction that you have to only sell the amount of applications as per your gross liability. Okay? So he sold extra, which means that this 150 is his surplus. Although it's a negative figure, we call it surplus because it is what the underwriter has sold in excess to his liability. Is that fine? So now first let's calculate unmarked applications and then we will see over here what to do with the surplus. Okay, that is where also the gross liability ratio is extremely important. Fine. First, unmarked applications calculation. Total applications received were 16,000. Out of those, these many were marked. Okay. In the previous problem, unmarked applications were directly given to you. Remaining applications did not bear any stamp. No stamp means unmarked, right? But in this case, it's not given, nothing is mentioned. So let's calculate. Second working note, unmarked applications. This is what we're going to calculate. Fine. So how do we start? Total applications received. Now we are doing a sorting type of work. Okay, we got all our applications and we are going to sort them based on how many are marked, how many are unmarked. So what does it say? Applications received for 16,000 shares. These many applications we got, less marked applications. How many are marked now? Marked are always given directly because you can easily count them. A, B and C. 8,000 to 850 plus 4,150. Let's total these. 8 to 850 plus 4,150. Okay. So how much do you get? Let's calculate. 8,000 plus 2,850 plus 4,150. You get 15,000. Alright. This total comes to 15,000. That means marked applications were 15,000 total. Now after you did all the sorting A, B and C, you found that some of the applications didn't have anybody's stamp, which means the company had directly received those applications, right? They had directly come to them, which means 1,000 applications after deducting were unmarked. Okay, unmarked applications 1,000. Now, you need to distribute the unmarked applications in the gross liability ratio. This 1,000 in the gross liability ratio, which we have calculated as 5:3 is to 2. Okay, so I'll just write it here itself instead of continuing on another page. In case of A, B and C, how do you calculate? 1,000 multiplied by 5 divided by 10. 5:3 is to 2, right? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then this will be 1,000 divided by multiplied by 3 upon 10, and last is 1,000 multiplied by 2 upon 10. Okay? Yes. So accordingly, whatever amounts we get, show it in your liability statements. Alright, we have to put it over there and reduce it from the respective liabilities. Fine. So let's see, first one, 1,000 multiplied by 5 divided by 10, you get 500. Let's show it over here. So the first one gets 500 as per his liability. Then what will be the second one? Second is 3 by 10, right? So 300, and the last one will be 200, 2 by 10. Okay. So 5, 3, 2. Sorry, 200. Is it clear? So what we have done, minus the unmarked applications from whatever liability we were getting. Okay. So only after you have deducted this and this, then only whatever figure you get is going to be called a resultant liability or surplus. First only don't take the surplus and distribute it over here. Okay. Only after you have deducted unmarked applications. Fine. Now, you have to be very careful here. Since this is less unmarked applications, it is assumed that this is also negative. Am I right? Don't take it like a positive figure, because you will take minus 150 plus 200, okay, and you will minus the 2, which is again going to go wrong, correct? But since it is less unmarked, it means that here show it as a negative, it's a minus, alright. So what do we do? 2,000 minus 500, this gives us 1,500. Okay, then 3,150 minus 300, gives us again 2850. Right? And this one, negative 150 minus 200 it is. Now I have put the negative bracket here, I mean the bracket to show that it's a negative, but in actually since it is already saying less, we don't really need to show the bracket, right? But just to make it simpler for you and to avoid confusion, I'm putting a bracket here to show that it's a negative. Okay, so 150, negative 150 minus your negative 200. How much does it become? So this will be negative 350. 200 plus 150 we do, but we still show it as a negative sign. Okay, because it's minus and minus, both are minus, so the sign will be negative. Now, whenever we get a surplus, that means whenever one underwriter has a negative figure, which means he has sold quite many, right, from what he had agreed upon. And for that, his surplus needs to be redistributed to the other people. Like he has sold extra, but then according to his contract, he was supposed to sell only 4,000. Now, if he managed to sell extra, we can't give him extra credit for it. Like we can't, we can neither give him sort of more commission or whatever, neither can we give him more liability. You can't make him pay for those shares, fine? So if it is a surplus, that surplus needs to be redistributed among the other two. So we say allocation of surplus among other underwriters in the gross liability ratio. So how much is the surplus right now? 350. Let's calculate. Third one. Let's see what to do with the surplus. Surplus of C, you don't really need to show a working note for this, is very simple, but just to show you over here, surplus of C you need to distribute between now two underwriters. Sorry, how many underwriters are left? You have just two underwriters, that is A and B. C we have said already has a surplus, correct? So remaining underwriters, that is the other underwriters, A and B will get this surplus. That means you can deduct this 350 from their liability. Fine, it's like passing on your liability. I was telling you an example of the whole lottery system, right? If you're given lots, or lotteries to sell, sometimes you may finish your quota and then you may help a friend, like you collect extra or you know more people. So you collect and you give it to your friend, right? Help him also to fill up his lotteries. You following? It's kind of like that. So if C has done extra or sold extra applications, he can allocate those two, that extra surplus, give it to the other two underwriters. But now in what ratio? Their ratios were 5 is to 3 is to 2, correct? Now this was A is to B is to C. C has done his job, okay? So exclude him, he already has a surplus. And the remaining people, their liability or their gross liability ratio now is 5 is to 3. If you remove C out of it, deduct him, now the ratio becomes 5 is to 3. Fine. So this 350 divided, multiplied by 5 by 8, not 10. Now it is 5 plus 3, 8. Correct? And give him also 350 multiplied by 3 by 8. Have you understood this? So same ratio, but not the entire ratio, because C is not in the picture. So you don't have 3 parts. You just have the 2 parts. Fine. So 350 multiplied by 5 divided by 8, you get 218.75. I'll make that 219, round it up, and 350 multiplied by 3 divided by 8 gives you 131.25. I'll keep it the same as 131. Okay, so 219 and 131, A and B will get out of C's surplus. Okay, so 219, 131, and what happens to his amount? What is going to happen? In this case, it will get nullified. Okay, so again, the whole thing has been minused. So I will say 350. Fine. So again, this is, don't add it up, but this is supposed to be negative. So less whatever 350, and this gets striked off. Fine. 350 is gone now. Positive, negative, 350 will be gone. Is this clear? So let's get these balances now. How much is left of net liability? 1500 minus 219. You get 1281. Then 2850 minus 131. You get 2719. And C doesn't have any liability because he did in excess. So he will not have any liability that he needs to pay to the company. He is free now. Okay. So these two, that is A and B, have the liability that we have just calculated. Okay. C is free because he has had right in the beginning sold a lot many applications than what he needed to. Is that fine? So very simple calculation. You may get a negative figure, that is a surplus, and you need to redistribute that surplus or allocate it to the other underwriters who have a liability. Now let's cross check the net liability of A and B, how much it totals up to. C doesn't have. 1281 plus 2719. It gives you how much? 4,000 shares liability is remaining. Now go back and check here in your problem. How many shares did we try to sell? 20,000 equity shares. How many share applications did we receive? 16,000. Which means 4,000 remained unsubscribed. Correct? We have a case of under subscription. Now, who is going to take that remaining 4,000? It is the underwriters, right? But from our calculation, we found that C has already sold everything he could. He has no liability, and the remaining two, A and B, will be paying off or will be assuming this liability of 4,000 shares. Have you followed? Which is why their total of net liability comes to 4,000. Right? So that is your problem number 2 with a surplus calculation that needs to be redistributed.